I've seen many of you up in my home turf on occasion, and now such a blessing to be here on your home turf and to share in this teachers' conference. I'm interested in knowing how many of you are old enough to have remembered when John F. Kennedy was shot. Could you raise your hand? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Mrs. Lehman, of course, 4, 5 here, maybe. All right, I don't know that I'm a historian. I care a lot about history. And so we weren't really planning this, but just the way things worked out, we flew down yesterday evening and talked to Jacob Peters here. At least I texted him and said, hey, what should I see in Dallas? And he said, oh, yeah, I think you called it the Kennedy Shooting Museum. And that sixth floor thing. And so I didn't think I would ever do that, but mind you, that's what we did today. And oh my, I remember so well. I think I was in 3rd grade, and I came home from school. I went to public schools, both Sheila and I did. And when I walked into, of course, we had heard at school that President Kennedy had been assassinated. And my mother said, Melvin, here, she had some supper for my dad. He was out plowing somewhere in the field. Said, take this out to your dad and tell him that President Kennedy was shot. And so that's what I did. And I remember my dad, and he was from the old school bib overalls and all in his tractor, and I gave him the things, and I said, Dad, President Kennedy was shot today. And I could still hear him say in his guttural German, that can't be true. Well, it was. So a bonus for inviting us that we got from your invitation to come here to Texas was an opportunity to visit that site. And honestly, I was sobered all over again by that event, and reminded that Jesus Christ, according to the book of Revelation chapter 1, the Prince of the kings of the earth. This stuff does not happen unless he at least withholds his hand and allows it or directs it in some fashion. So here we are in this place today, I think, by God's design. And so Sheila and I happen to be here. Just a few words about us before we get into the discussion here this evening. Sheila and I have 7 children. We've been married for, in April, it'll be 51 years. 7 children, 29 grandchildren. 3 great-grandchildren. Brother Dan, we graduated to that level, I believe. I don't know what you call that, but whatever. We're getting used to it. So I've taught school for 46 years, 16 years in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and the rest of the years there at Faith Builders in Guys Mills, and just retired as of June 30th this year. And I just got done finished teaching winter term, so I'm still kind of in the classroom off and on. But at any rate, a blessing to be here with you and share with you. Listen, 46 years doesn't mean that much. Many of you have had just rich and deep experiences teaching and could do just as well or better than me talking about this subject this evening. But I'm glad and delighted to share with you a few things that I have gleaned over the years. The subject in focus here this evening is holy living in a postmodern world. Now, already we are talking about a postmodern world. So just so you're aware of that, and I'm a bit dated just with my white hair and all that to begin with. But I am aware that we're not, we kind of just keep on moving rapidly from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. So perhaps a little bit on that in hope for tomorrow, because the postmodern world does represent another movement other than what I want to talk about this evening. So, as the planning committee has framed our time together here, the concept of wholeness or holiness and completeness is a part of the algorithm here, I suppose you might say, as well as, not as well, but preceding the concept of a postmodern world. And so the question is, what does this wholesome or holy or complete or harmonious or cohesive or fully formed life actually look like? I believe that Brother Kervin Gordon, Kervin, could you raise your hand? I don't even know who you are. Where are you at? Are you in this audience here somewhere? Oh, I don't see him here this evening. I guess he's coming tomorrow. But I wanted to be sure that I don't step on his toes. I think he's doing into his, not on his toes, into his territory. I think he's going to be talking more about, I don't know, our physical well-being and such like. I'm going to stay away from that for the most part, but talk about wholesome, cohesive, complete, harmonious, synergistic. I don't know what term you want to put to it, but the term that completeness is what we have in mind here. So just a few things here. I don't have my computer open. I have a few notes here, and I can see the screen back there, but age catches up to you in a number of ways, and it's like, I don't know if I'll read this right or not. So here we go. Postmodernism is a late 20th century intellectual, cultural, and artistic movement that acts as a skeptical, ironic reaction against the certainty, objective truth, and structural order of modernism. It challenges established universal narratives. We sometimes call those meta-narratives, in favor of fragmented, subjective, and socially constructed perspectives. That is not my definition. My father-in-law would have called this some kind of an 8-cylinder definition. Okay, so I just want you to know I didn't construct it, but I offer it because it came from folks at least who think they're authorities on the subject, and they wrote it this way, one of their own. Very, very interesting. I want to talk about it just a little bit. So key characteristics in the first blank there: rejection of grand narratives or of the meta-narrative, you might say. Disbelief in universal truths such as science, religion, or progress explaining everything for everyone. I want you to be sure to underscore science. Our thinking is, as soon as we hear postmodernism, we think anti-religious, anti-God, mainly directed at those Christians who have those foolish ideas. It's much more full-orbed than that. How so would it be skeptical of science? Well, because the science of modernism had claimed to have the answers. Almost absolute truth. After all, 2 + 2 is always equal to 4. And if you just extend that into all of the concepts of science, well, you have this notion, this field that we're talking about, something that is immovable. It's absolutely true. And so I just want you to see that postmodernism, it wasn't only aimed at what you might call the religious right or the conservative religious thinking people. That was kind of, I don't know, maybe a byproduct of it. In some ways was aimed more clearly at the scientific world that these people had grown up with and who were tired of it. Being able, the scientific world making this attempt to explain everything about life. And so some of them even saying you could reduce life, even spiritual life, to, I don't know, chemicals. Just certain chemicals that are active in the body that make you think this way or that way or do this or do that. And so I just want to clarify that so that we understand that while we have really come out with, blazing against postmodernism, and I do, in fact, I would say that they raised some issues that needed raised. Okay, so I just want to be careful to say that in almost every movement, I always taught my students, movements, whether they're philosophical, cultural, or whatever, historically have happened for a reason. There was something behind them that drove them. And typically it was something that was at least in part true, if they weren't really onto something that we needed to pay attention to. And in fact, that would reference, again, my first point there, that the science needed to have somebody look them square in the eye and say, wait a minute, you don't have all the answers that you think you have. What about this and what about that? Okay, maybe enough there. But just hold in hand here that when we look at postmodernism, we're asking, how do we live in a world that actually was shaking us, shaking the Western world into place that it needed to be shaken? And that Christians, I think, had some answers. So we'll look at this. Secondly, here, skepticism and irony, a tendency toward questioning authority is in that blank, and using satire, irony, and absurdity to challenge traditional views. Emphasis here on questioning authority. Now, don't immediately think of chain of command authority. Like the boss and the next guy, the parent and the child. That's chain of command, but just authority. I know and you don't know. Okay, the professors. These people in their colleges were going to challenge their professors. It didn't matter if they were Christian or not Christian. They were just going to say, what do you mean? Why do you have the right to say that? What makes you think you're right? Can you defend it? Okay, so when I put here questioning authority, don't think the chain of command or something like parental authority. Think broader than that. The concept that I know. Third, socially constructed truth, the belief that knowledge and reality are not absolute but are constructed. And here's the main thing to see through language, culture, and power structures. Now, I'm talking to teachers here, mostly teachers, I guess. I'm not quite sure what the percentage is who are actually teachers, and those of you who are not teachers, but it matters little. We're thinking education, the training of children, raising up our children. So here you go. Here's where it starts to bite into how education is actually done and how you think about it. Because the view is it's socially constructed. You, as teachers, are more instrumental in the social construction of the culture of your community next to the parents. I would say you probably are one of the more important persons who are shaping it. How are you shaping it? Well, if they're right, through language, through culture, through power structures. Let me unpack that just a little wee bit, because it's very, very important, I think. You'll note that I reference here the word deconstruction, because a postmodernist is going to take what was constructed and do their best to tear it down. And I'll get to that in just a moment here. But so if you go back to language, I mean, I myself have taught my students. Jacob, I know you heard me say this. I didn't say it yet, but he who defines the term wins the argument. Think through that a moment. So look at language there, right? So this is the postmodernist is going to say the world you live in was constructed through language. So you have been instructed on certain words in a certain way. Just think the word modesty for a moment. Okay, I promise you that you have, well, I think anyway, I'm right on this, that you have a different notion in your mind by what that term means than if you go down the street to the local pub or bar and walk in there and ask the person in there what they think the term modest means. I'll almost guarantee you have a different construct on it. Do you see what they mean when they say that, the postmodernists, what it says? So look, your concepts out there they have been constructed by the way you have used language. Okay? You didn't hear me say that that's a bad thing to do. In fact, since that's true, Since it's true, then I take the opportunity in my classroom to actually, I don't mind saying it all, indoctrinate my students. This is what this term means. And I generally try, by God's grace, to have opened myself to a scriptural instruction. Let that thing shape my mind and my thinking and my heart as best I can, admitting I still don't have it perfect, but doing my best. So I'm wanting to be careful to say, even though I just got done telling you that we ought to admit that, much of language shapes and forms the way we think about things and how we define the terms. It's big time. But I see it as a positive thing in that that's for the educator, because that gives the educator the opportunity and the place to actually form and shape the next generation by engaging with the language, the terms that are being used, the books that are being read, et cetera, et cetera. The second piece there is culture. I do a whole series on culture. I'm not even going to start. Sheila says, that's my wife's name, she's heard it so often she could preach it herself. So ask her, she'll help you with that one. And the third one here is power structures. Michael Foucault, if you're familiar with the language of or the people of postmodernism, so Martin Heidegger, Michael Foucault, and people like that, Foucault particularly really pushed on this power structures. The best place where you can see that is where historians will argue that, the histories are written by those who won the wars. So when a history is written of World War II, it's not written by a Nazi loser. It's written by somebody who won the war. Okay? And the point there being is, well, of course, then it's going to have, those in power will instruct, they will produce the narrative. They will tell you what the story actually is. And I don't think I need to tell you with mass media today, social media, and there's a powerful tool in the hands of, I'm going to say the devil first and his henchmen. Also, a powerful tool for the good. I want to be careful to say that. But a powerful tool to use for the power structures, the political powerful, to get a hold of and use it. I mean, one of the worst cases we've seen just in the last few days, a week or two, is Iran. So you can't help but see how they're shutting down the internet, and I don't know what all happened over there, but the powerful stayed in power by managing the narrative, the story that's being told. Now, of course, things are happening that we wonder what it's all going to turn out like. I see I need to move here pretty fast. Fourth, blurring of boundaries, the mixing of high and low culture, and the rejection of strict categorizations. Going to be talking about that a bit here in community in just a moment. So you might call this the inclusion thing, the equality that is pushed here. And again, let me remind you, not all bad ideas. Contextualization, a focus on local specific experiences over abstract principles. And I'm going to describe that by going to the next section here. So PM means postmodern. Communities, if you are familiar with these people much at all or have read much of them, particularly the postmoderns are really arguing for community. They're saying, can we get back to community somehow? I'm fascinated by it. So clearly the individualistic drives have driven, I don't know, they've created enough of unrest, even at the gut level of the non-believer, of the pagan, that they're saying, something is lost here. Something is wrong. Can we regain something of community? Those of us who are old enough and remember, okay, I grew up in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and back in those days in winter Bible school, just to give you an example here, when Washington Franklin Conference was still all one conference, mind you. I don't know how many thousand strong, but I know one thing: when we went to winter Bible school at Chambersburg Mennonite Church, on a Wednesday evening, there were between 500 and 600 people packed into a church, not a whole lot bigger than this one. It was a huge group. This was a community. This is Winter Bible School. It was, so Sheila and I grew up with that kind of powerful community around us. I know the arguments about, we don't want all these Mennonites piled up in one place. Let's spread out. I understand. I'm on board with it. You're doing a good thing. You're down here in Texas. It's wide open. It's a good thing. So don't hear me taking a shot at that. Just hear me saying that there is something to be said when we feel the loss of community and we ask ourselves, what happened? Where did that sense of solidarity and strength, where did it disappear somewhere? And how can we regain it? They're asking a very similar question. But they're asking it from a different perspective. And I offer the metaphor of the puzzle here to describe to you what I mean here by this difference. So the complete puzzle is the meta-narrative. Thank you for advancing there. When I get going here, I forget about it and I don't advance things. It looks like Dwayne's on the ball back there. Thank you. So is the meta-narrative. Think big story. The puzzle pieces are the personal narrative. It's my story. Okay? Now make sure you follow this. Sheila loves to do puzzles. I want to use the word hate. It's not quite the right word, but it's almost there. I hate puzzles. We have a really good time about it because it's a wonderful thing. She does her thing and I do my thing. So don't misunderstand this here, but it's kind of like I said, I don't get it. So you just spent 4, 5, 6 hours putting that puzzle together, that 500-piece, 1,000-piece thing or whatever it is, and then you're going to tear it apart, put it all back in the box. Okay. Forgive us old people. Remember, there's some remedies to dementia. And one of them is to at least keep your mind working there and put things together. So, but I do watch her. I do look over her shoulder periodically, and I see how this works. She sets that box right there. I know I'm repeating something you already know, but I want you to get the feel of this. She sets that box right there, and she studies that thing a bit. That's the whole picture. That's what the picture looks like. She's got a box full of all kinds of pieces laying all over the place that independently they mean nothing. But she does actually begin to sort them a little bit, and she tends to put one color over here and, the border pieces over here. I don't know what all she does, but she has kind of some method to her madness about how you can actually sort of get this stuff arranged and all of that. And then once she does that, it's to that, normally does the border, but she's still checking that meta-narrative, the big story. She looks at it to know what to do with the individual pieces. Okay? And you can pick up any one of those individual pieces and hold it up and look at it and stare at it as long as you want to. And they're like meaningless. They're like, what? It's meaningless, totally meaningless. Okay? It only has meaning when you find the place that it belongs in the puzzle. Okay? Then it begins to take on the shape and the color and has meaning within that big picture. Well, that is the classical way that a Christian would think. The meta-narrative, the big picture matters. And everything gets fit in there. Wholesome living for you and for your students means that what you're doing is you're looking at your personal narrative. That's the puzzle piece. You're thinking about yourself and you're constantly asking, where do I fit in this picture? Psychologists call it identity and belonging. They want to know where do I fit? And when a person can figure out where they fit, so to speak, and they actually have some comfort that they fit into this big picture, then they feel like they are, what's the word? They're making a contribution. They're fruitful. They feel like they've done something. But it's when they feel removed from that there's loss of identity and belonging. This is a great model to think about for church administration, which we're not into here right now, but that's the issue. The issue is, does Sally or Joe or Jim or whoever, how do they see their piece fitting into the meta-narrative? Now, of course, we could talk about a couple of meta-narratives or big stories. The biggest one of all, this sounds so Sunday schoolish that I feel uncomfortable saying, is the story of Jesus himself. And that's the biggest story. I love Revelation chapter 1. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is, which was, and which is to come, the Almighty. That's the biggest story of all. And we have then smaller stories fitting into that picture. Now, the postmodern, I want you to listen carefully. They really have followed the individualistic the individualistic framework and the concepts of democracy to the furthest extent. They see this differently. I just have done some reading just recently on this. I'm astounded. I never could quite get this, but I kind of get the picture by now. What they see, if you think that same story of those puzzle pieces, they're saying, listen, there is no big story. There's none. Quit looking for it because it doesn't exist. And so when it says deconstruct, so when you start saying my story belongs in that bigger story of Jesus, the Lord, and then furthermore, I'm the son of Clyde Lehman, I started describing, they say, listen, well, hold on, just hold on. So this Jesus, and so deconstruction means what they're going to do is they're going to take those puzzle pieces that you put together so well, right? And so you've got that picture, and they're going to take a piece out of that puzzle, and they're going to say, that's not true. How do you know that's true? Look here, let me show you this. How about evolution? What would that have to say about how the world came to? Okay, they're good. So deconstruction means just simply dip into that big picture and pull out a piece or so and hammer on it until it is useless, until they can convince you that that piece of puzzle is worthless. Now you've got a gap in your picture. That's called deconstruction. Okay, now it takes on many forms, but that's essential. You see, it's just simply tearing the puzzle apart. You see that piece by piece. And they do it through language, they do it through other means, but that's it. But then what are they thinking when they think community then? So tolerance and pluralism and egalitarianism and all that stuff that you hear being talked about, that's the key. They're saying, okay, we want a community where we're not going to try to put the puzzle pieces together because there isn't any meta-narrative. We're just going to take lesbian whoever and gay so-and-so and happily married these two, and we're just going to put them all, and you know what, if you're a family and you're a Christian, you can even be a part of this community too. And we're just going to bring you all into one community, and we're going to sit you down, we're going to ask you one thing. Keep your mouth shut and don't you say a word about how anybody else lives their lives. Everything is just okay. It doesn't matter what happens here, everything is okay. You just be quiet. Okay, now they won't say that out loud, but they literally are going to take that those puzzles that Sheila has, and they're going to pull them out piece by piece, and they're just going to randomly put them together and say, listen, we can make a picture, we can make something work here, as long as you are absolutely tolerant, as long as you accept anybody. In short, if you're just okay without ever calling anything sin, we could actually live together, just do okay. Right therein lies the problem. They are exactly right. You will never form a big picture that way. But their big picture is tolerance, pluralism, egalitarianism, and so forth. That's it. And anybody who stands in the way of that doesn't belong in that community. And the difficulty is, so us from our big picture, called into the family of God, given a Bible that gives us some instructions and so forth, feel compelled to call sin, sin, and righteousness, righteousness. And the difficulty is there's no place for you in that community that doesn't want a big picture. Now, of course, I'm painting the picture, and they're not all going to respond exactly in that way. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, there we go. So the words that belong in there, just kind of walking through the Bible inerrancy to modernism, to postmodernism, and not yet to post-post. So the Bible and inerrancy. So faith in a meta-narrative, as I just got done explaining, and I hope I was careful with the words there, so we got it by now. That's the big picture. That's the puzzle put together. That defines and gives meaning to the particulars, including my personal story. That really had been the basic framework of Western civilization for a long time, up until about 1750, 1800. Maybe even a little bit later than that. The real break, when I teach this historically, the thinking of the intellectuals always precedes what works its way down into common culture. And an example of this is Charles Darwin wrote his book on the origin of species in 1859. Well, that's when it was published. That was well before it became a big topic in Western civilization. It wasn't until World War I and post-World War I that the Scopes trials here in the United States happened. So the point that I'm making here to you is it takes a little while for this stuff to kind of work its way in, but the framework for 1,500 years had been the Bible, some level of inerrancy. Of course, there were arguments galore all that time, but you could just count on most, even up, at least in my local community where I grew up. Sheila and I often reflect on that. We went to public schools. We did not, there wasn't one, we didn't know of any divorced families among the students who we went to school with in elementary school. Now, by the time we got to high school, that had changed. But in elementary school, we did. All up and down the road that I lived along, which was a rural country road just outside of Chambersburg, almost everybody, I couldn't think, just offhand, I could not think of anybody who did not go to church most Sunday mornings. They didn't always go, but everybody did. In the community that I was familiar with, I'm not talking about Mennonites, I'm not talking about Anabaptists, I'm talking about the average person. Along that same street today, well, I'm sorry, they moved out. My sisters told me there was a lesbian couple that moved in. Anyway, it's very, very different. Very, very, very different. So the Bible inerrancy was just arguing, look, there is a framework, and your puzzle piece needs to fit in there somewhere. Modernism judges or dismisses the meta-narrative on the basis of empirical evidence perceived in data. In short, the scientific method. Okay, so I was trained and raised on that in public schools. Okay, if science says it, it's good. Okay, this is a problem. You can see why then evolutionary thought, et cetera, is going to be a problem, because if in fact the modernist is able to dismiss pieces of the meta-narrative based on scientific data or perceived scientific data, well then you're going to begin to pull out piece by piece parts of that puzzle, and after a while you're looking at a picture that's got holes in it. And the picture that's got holes in it is problematic. So modernism was a problem in that way. Postmodernism rejects all meta-narratives, hopes that meaning and identity will emerge in communities built on tolerance and diversity and inclusion. Okay, now this is a teachers' meeting, and the purpose of this meeting is to ask ourselves the question, well, so what are we to be doing? How are we to live and respond in the middle of the kind of picture that I just got done trying to paint for you? And so we can have the next slide there. So how should we then live? What should we be doing? Holy living, wholesome, cohesive, synergistic, harmonious. Okay, we're asking that question. How can we live that way in a postmodern world? Now, I've already given you most of the pieces that I would push out here on that point. So, one, embrace and teach the meta-narrative. And what is it? Probably the most comprehensive, short version of the meta-narrative is about the Logos in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Speaking of Jesus, the Logos, okay? And so we could go on down through that chapter and think about that some more. Again, I've always resisted just simple Sunday school answers, but you know what? Some of the answers that have always been the answer are still the answer. Okay, and so I don't hesitate to say, look, if we lose that big picture, if we lose that point, Jesus is Lord of all. He's the Prince of the Kings of the earth. His incarnation, his suffering, his death, and his resurrection, and his ascension, all of them are the story of Jesus. And that's the reason I speak with some confidence this evening, because, brothers and sisters, do we actually hold it to be true that while I'm speaking to you, Jesus has ascended to the right hand of God, and he sits there and he intercedes on our behalf, and he's already taken care of the situation that has to do with sin, if we just will receive that. And so when pardon me for the terminology, when all hell cuts loose all over the earth, who in the world is in charge? Jesus is. Do we really believe that? Do we? I do. Amen. Thank you. He is sovereign. Let us never lose hold of that narrative. It is not the American military that will win the day. It is Jesus, the Lord of all. Now, if he chooses to use the American military in whatever way he wants to, okay, I'm certainly fine with that. But they're not in charge. He is. He is the Lord of all, the Logos. Secondly, the church. Ephesians chapters 1, 2, and 3 particularly push really hard on this point. And Paul there, he repeatedly calls it the mystery of the ages. When I'm talking to audiences, I don't ask for raise of hands, but so how many have read The Lord of the Rings? Well, yeah, go ahead, hands up. How many of you have watched the film of Lord of the Rings? I'm holy, I did not. Oh, listen, a fabulously written book and captivating, for sure. But it doesn't hold a candle to the great mystery of the ages. Paul says, listen, the great men of old all looked forward to this day and wished to see it. But they never had the opportunity. If we had the time and the space here, we would go back and just look at particularly at Ephesians chapter 2. I don't mind telling you, just a personal testimony for Sheila and me, this was probably the concept that kept me in the classroom for 46 years. What took me out of some other things and got me in there was, look, we didn't say it just one day, but as we thought through things in the early years of our marriage and wondered what we would do with our lives, we began to, I don't know if we said it to each other or out loud or how, but listen, if what we claim we believe, if we actually believe that, if we really do, it would seem to me that it would so powerfully alter your life, and it would pin it down. It's buying into the Logos and his bride, the body of Christ. Paul says in Ephesians that this is a mystery, that God would bring everything together and that even the angels, the powers that be, would look on the church to find out something new about the God whom they serve. I know I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you could go and find there in Ephesians chapter 2 language that speaks in that direction. And we said to ourselves, listen, if that's true, and if what we say is true, for example, if indeed the church is the only organization that ever existed that is actually going to outlast both time and eternity, if that's the only one, then pray tell, why wouldn't we give everything we have to that? Why wouldn't we? Why would we work for IBM or some other big shot company? What would be the point? They're not going to last. But the church will. And so when that fastened itself on me, I said, okay, Mrs. Lehman, the two of us, we're going to enter into this the best we know how. And honestly, we have failed 1,000 times. But we have essentially pounded our stake in right there and said, that's where it's at. And so we're giving ourselves heart, soul, and mind. And we think in terms of local church first. And then broader church, of course. We need to embrace and teach this meta-narrative, this truth of the Logos in the church without any fear. And so I just want to encourage you as teachers, of course we don't get up every day and teach on the Logos. Of course we don't get up every day and teach on the church. But we have opportunity to weave into our teaching in all kinds of different ways, that big picture. I'm not afraid to ask the question. How many of you algebra teachers have been asked the question, why do we study algebra? Look at the hands going up around here. Well, I always say to my students, well, when you're 30, come by and I'll answer your question for you. Takes a little perspective. You need to see you need to see the big picture. No, I try to answer it, of course. It's part of the big picture. It's part of the design of the world. Anyway, I'm not going to try to answer the question. I'm just saying that here is the core. And here's what I found out. When students know that your life actually is rooted in these two truths, their questions about what you're teaching actually get less because you embody it. You follow what I'm saying? If in fact they know that at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, Mr. Lehman's life is in fact totally under the control of the Logos and because of the Logos. And if they know in fact that Mr. Lehman is committed to the body of Christ unreservedly, if they know that, then the other piece is hanging out here somewhere, at least in their heads. If they're immature, think how an immature, well, something, if Mr. Lehman thinks that's important to study some algebra, well, it must fit into that bigger picture somewhere. Now, they can't think through that in that way, I know. But I'm just saying, just by the feel of things, when they know that's where we're at. If you're a parent, it's the same thing. It equals the same thing. For parents who are committed in that way, the other pieces fit that big picture. That's the cohesion that we're looking for. Number 2 here is to build community with time-proven structures. Emphasize the unity of community, not the disparity of community. Now, you didn't hear me say that there's not a place. So we're all different people here. We know that. Community does have to, in fact, have a certain level of tolerance. Community does, in fact, have to have many of those things that we talked about. They have to work towards an equality. In fact, we're taught that in the scriptures. Here again, I'm saying it's not like the postmodernists did not have a point because they saw this was kind of, but, I mean, we know this. Where there's a high level of intolerance, community is hard to build. Okay? Where there's a high level of a big disparity between the rich and the poor in any society is a problem. It creates more issues than it solves. That's for sure. I mean, all of those things that they touched on, there was a point to be made. But if those points need to be leveraged to create the unity of the community, not just to figure out that we can all individually live however we jolly well please, whether we're sinning or whether we're not, and all will be well. Two very different ways of actually viewing that. So emphasize the unity of community. 2, promote traditional family values and practices. I'm preaching to the choir, I know it. But like I say, the choir sometimes forgets. So they need preached to now and then. Just to keep our memories alive. So family values and practices. You stay-at-home moms. There's nothing wrong with it. Working ladies, I understand that. But again, the question is, what kind of picture do we actually paint? And what kind of frustrates me is if the lady who chooses to stay at home and to raise a family and they're second fiddle to those who get professional careers. I don't like to hear it that way. I have no issue with a professional career lady who becomes a nurse and does. I understand that. But in terms of what's promoted and understood and the felt realities, these are the things we need to care about. Create meeting places and new traditions. Raise your hand if you're from the Russian Mennonite community. Wow, there's a lot of you here. I'm reading a text right now from, I forget who put it together, but it's on the Malachna community from Ukraine. And looked at the sizes of their churches that they built. I'm blowing out of the water. 700 to 1,000 people, they would build these churches big enough for it. I think maybe some of the Mexican Mennonites, I'm not quite sure. I'm like, whoa, these are big churches. The going thing in our community is house churches. Well, I don't mean just in our church, but you hear this house churches and smaller and smaller and smaller. There's a power there. Now, don't misunderstand. Don't hear me. You'll hear me pushing forward. If you live in my community, small men's groups, this kind of thing, I'm all for it. There is also a place to create the meeting places where community can be community. I don't know if I'm in for a 1,000-person building. I'll just admit that up front. I'm not quite there, but still there really is. Again, remember that Chambersburg Mennonite church and 500, 600 people gathered in that church? There was something powerful on that for a little 10-year-old boy walking in there that just was moving that I've never forgotten. And to this day, if you catch me at the right moment, I'll probably tear up about it, as powerful as it was. The way it was, okay. Don't ask me how to balance all of that and make it work well. But so meeting places and new traditions. Anybody who knows me very well, will probably say that Sheila and I are hopelessly conservative. Well, don't mind. Hopelessly traditional. I don't mind. The reason, I'll just be very, very frank with you, I have learned that traditional practices have strengths in them that ought not to be ignored. And I wouldn't just toss them away for whatever reason. However, my point here is you need to make new traditions. I don't mean that are in the face of old traditions. I mean that new traditions that center, that pull things together. I'll give you one that has happened. My father was not a singer at all. We sang around the table sometimes. Oh, we did every night, actually, in our family devotions. We were not a singing family at all. And my dad, for some reason, he loved Onward Christian Soldiers. And he would start that thing probably an octave low. And by the time we got halfway through, we were all, I had 12 siblings, and we were all laughing. But my dad never skipped a beat. He'd sing that thing the whole way through, monotone. Okay. Well, my sons today, Jordan is our youngest son. He sings with they love to sing, and they're good singers. I'm not bragging on them. I'm just saying I know they're good, not because of us, but they learned how to sing and sing well. And one of the traditions that Sheila and I have developed is every 5 years that our family gets together, every 5th year for our anniversary, our whole family gets together for a weekend, and I tell the boys, Kyle or Jordan or one of them, hey, bring some men's music along. This is a tradition my father would have never even thought of, for good reason. None of us could sing. Bring some good music along. Bring at least 2 or 3 pieces that we've learned to sing before, and then bring at least one new one, men's music that we haven't sung. And so they do. And sometime during that weekend, we gather around the table, and we get that music out, and we begin to sing it. And the scene that has really gripped my heart is to see the young grandsons in particular, 2, 3, 4 years old, maybe 5, 6, maybe a little older, sitting around the table there with their mouths wide open, eyes starry-eyed, looking. Believe me, they're not looking at their grandpa; they're looking at their uncles. Okay, and I just know, I know they're being drug into a culture and a tradition that I want. Okay, that's what I mean by a new tradition. Don't be afraid to step up and produce some new ones that have not been all that common among us over the years. And in schools, we have an opportunity to do that. Education and curriculum aligned with community values. And I could say an awful lot about that. I'm going to let it here for the sake of time. At supper here is coming up, right? And the last one there, respect for authority. I, again, have a whole series that I do on that, trying to think through it and wonder what we need to do to have some recovery in our day on a sense of, when I say authority, I don't mean abusive authority. I just mean that, well, I'll say it this way. I've been saying for a couple of years now that 4 big questions that we have got to answer. Who is Christ? What is the church? Who are its members? And the 4th one is the biggest one of all. Who in the world says so anyway? Who says so? In your church, you can ask that question. Who says so? That's a good question. I need to go. My last point is crossing the bridge. And so if we can get that one up, I'll go ahead and run this one from here then, because I teach a class called Life and Leadership for Men at Faith Builders. Just finished up with it on Tuesday, a little early, but to come down here. And in that one of the metaphors I use repeatedly is this one, crossing the bridge. And my point is generally this. The problem in life with people is not their ideals. The problem is their habits. Their ideals are good. It's getting them from ideals into ways of life. The same thing is true for community. So this is crossing the bridge in community. On the left-hand side of the bridge there, you see community diversity. And so I'm pushing here a little bit on this community issue because my point here, one of my main points here I'm hoping you're picking up on is the postmodernist is interested in community from a different perspective than you are. What is our perspective and how should we be working at it? So here's community and diversity on the one side. On the other side of the bridge is create a culture where there is genuine identity and belonging. Okay, there's younger folks here, there's older folks here. Some of us have been teaching for years. Some of us have our hair has changed color quite a bit over and so on. So there's a diversity here, of course. Brothers and sisters, if you're in a place of leadership, parent, I can tell you, the question for a child growing up, a question for the teenagers in our community, even a question for the young marrieds, even a question. The question is, who do they identify with? And who do they belong to? It's identity and belonging. You see this probably the most obviously in where there's parents who adopt a child. If they adopt a child, at the end of the day, the question is decided on identity and belonging. That's where it ends up. And so that's what we're after. Well, how does that happen? Well, nothing new here for you at all. I first of all want to be sure that my bridges are always held up by a commitment to Jesus as Lord. I'm not talking here about some way that you can we can just manage things and build everything up and make everything work. It is committed to Jesus as Lord. That bridge, if take that one out and the rest of it doesn't count. The one that you're very familiar with, I'll just say it again, submitting one to another is that's the mantra of the New Testament. It's taught by Jesus, it's taught by Paul repeatedly, and I've seen it repeatedly as a leader. I know something about my own heart and its capacity to refuse to submit. I know that, but I know one thing: you cannot create this culture of identity and belonging if you don't learn this piece here. And if I may yet talk about that old term, I know there's not space there, but you can write it out here. So I'm not German. No, I don't know how to speak Plattdeutsch, nor do I know how to speak Pennsylvania Dutch, nor do I know German. I barely know English, but I know it a little bit. But I learned a little bit about this word Gelassenheit, and I really, really do like it. And it somehow captures something about community that our English terms don't quite get at. And yet we understand it. I think I understand it at some level. It's commitment, it's submission, it's humility. I mean, you can put all of the meekness, you can write all of those terms, and somehow the scholars who use the word Gelassenheit, and believe it or not, I found this term used by the postmoderns. But they, of course, mean something different. Remember, he who defines the term wins the argument. But this evening, I just offer these to you. And what I'll do is pick up on that a little bit in the last session when we focus, when it has the title of Hope for Tomorrow, because I just want to say before I sit down, after giving this little idea of puzzles and this and that and the other thing, I firmly believe that as teachers, as schools, as communities, we have a rare opportunity in a world that has forgotten this to actually take a look at that puzzle. Take a look at it, ask ourselves the hard questions. Where do I belong? Where does my piece fit here? Refuse to try to destroy the puzzle or put my piece off to the side, but ask myself, where do I fit? Whom do I belong to? Let's pray. Father, I pause a moment here. These have been many words, and I know that they can go in our ears, and we can agree with them and quickly forget. And Lord, some of them probably should be forgotten. I pray by your good and Holy Spirit that you would take the words that were spoken, the songs that were sung, the prayers prayed while we're together, and I pray that these might take deep root in our hearts and that Jesus would be lifted up. I pray that what is ill-spoken would be forgotten, but the truth would be exalted. Give us eyes that see, ears that hear, and a heart that understands. And may the church prosper evermore. Amen. Thank you very much.